Okay, so hello everyone. Welcome to our wage theft workshop. We are the West Shore and Sooke WorkBC Centre, and we're working in partnership with the Worker Solidarity Network, who will be doing the core of our presentation today. I would just like to start with a territorial acknowledgement. The WorkBC Centre West Shore and Sooke recognizes the traditional territories of the Esquimalt, Songhees, Sooke, Chena, and Pacheedaht First Nations on which our offices are located. We're proud to provide employment-related services to these nations. So just a little brief agenda today. We're just going to go over the WorkBC services, and then we'll hand it over to the Worker Solidarity Network, and they'll be doing the wage theft clinic or workshop, and then we'll have a chance for questions. And at the end as well, we will send out everyone's contact information. So if you don't get a chance to answer or get your questions answered, you can always reach out to either one of our organizations. So a little bit about WorkBC. So WorkBC employment services are free and available to all unemployed British Columbians who are seeking employment and are legally eligible to work in BC. Some employed individuals may also be eligible for our services. For example, those who are at risk of losing their current job or are underemployed British Columbians with a disability. WorkBC centers are located across British Columbia. WorkBC offers a range of services that support job seekers to improve employment readiness and to find or maintain employment. And additionally, any BC job seeker can access the self-serve resource area of WorkBC Employment Services Centers. So speaking of our resource center, it's open to all job seekers. So whether you are eligible for our case management services where you can meet with an EA or not, you can access our resource room. So that means you can use our computers for all your job search needs or access a printer, photocopier for your job search documents. A staff member is available to assist you if you have any questions or need assistance, and resource services are provided on a drop-in or appointment basis. So if you need help with your resume or cover letter, or even just kind of want to stop by and chat about maybe what you might be looking for, I suggest dropping by your local WorkBC Centre. We also offer workshops. Our virtual workshops cover all aspects of job search and job retention to ensure you achieve your goals. That includes resume building, career planning, interview workshops, hidden job market, and a mature workers workshop as well. We also offer wage subsidy. So the wage subsidy program is designed to assist unemployed individuals or underemployed individuals to enhance their skills on the job. Wage subsidy assists the employer when hiring someone who lacks all of the necessary skills for a position by offering a percentage of your wages for a duration of up to 24 weeks. Next is our personal employment planning. So we provide individualized sessions with an employment advisor to build your return to work action plan, helping you define your path to success. We offer job start support as well. So that includes work clothing such as boots or scrubs, tools, and also short-term courses such as your food safe, first aid, and those are all available for those who are unable to afford it. Job sustainment services. So we offer job sustainment services to help you resolve issues impacting your ability to maintain employment. We can provide on-the-job or in-office support from experienced job coaches. They can help you mediate disputes with your employer, learn new procedures, or gain insight into today's workplace culture. And finally, job listings and labor market info newsletter. As a registered client of the West Shore or Sooke WorkBC centers, you can receive our newsletter, Job Links. This newsletter features a daily list of job leads, covers local employment information, as well as employment events and programs. If you would like any more information about WorkBC services and our center, you can head to our website as well. We will be linking that in an email that will follow up after this presentation. So that is our contact information. After this, now I think we'll pass it over to Worker Solidarity Network. So I will stop sharing my screen, and now I will let someone else take over there.
Thanks, folks. Yeah, I will. I'll share my screen if you want to just give me a second. Amazing. Can you folks see that? Great. 1 second while I get my tech set up. Yes, well, welcome to this portion of the workshop. My name is Nikki. I'm a staff member here at the Worker Solidarity Network. I'm really excited to be here. Thanks to the folks here at WorkBC for hosting this, really important, at least I think it's quite important workshop. And I'm excited to spend the next hour and a half with you. And maybe I will also give a acknowledgement and say that I know folks are calling from all over so-called BC, but I'm specifically calling today from the unceded ancestral territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Nations here in so-called Vancouver. And I invite folks to let us know in the chat where they are calling from and introduce themselves a little bit. It might help the next hour and a half feel a little bit more friendly. So this is kind of the brief outline of what today is going to look like. I will shortly go into speaking a little bit about what we do here at the Worker Solidarity Network. I know that some folks might not be familiar with what it is that we do and who we are. Then I'll kind of set the container for what the workshop will look like, and I'll pass it off to my colleagues who will each talk about items 4 through 7. So beginning with an overview of what wage theft looks like, how to recover your wages, and then the different avenues of justice that we have. And then we will have a quick Q&A period where you can ask any questions that have come up throughout the workshop. Then we'll go into breakout groups where you will actually kind of apply the knowledge of the workshop and try calculating your own wages and see what that's like. So a little bit about who we are, the Worker Solidarity Network. We exist to support specifically non-unionized and precarious workers across BC. And we advocate for the rights and interests of workers while at the same time taking collective action to improve labor standards for all. So I think when the organization was founded, folks realized that there exists a real gap for precarious workers who are not unionized, which is actually most precarious workers. And that's the kind of gap that we're trying to fill. And we do that in 3 different ways. The first way is exactly like with things like these workshops, by distributing accessible Know Your Rights education. And then we also support and empower individuals with complaints. So if you go through this workshop today and realize that you want to submit your own complaint, to the Employment Standards Branch, that is exactly what we are here to support you with. And then finally, my favorite, element of how we take collective action is through campaigning for long-term improvements. It's always really great when one worker can get the justice that they deserve by getting their stolen wages back. But what is ultimately always better in the long run is campaigning and making sure that all workers across the province have the rights that they deserve and that their rights are protected and enforced. So we wouldn't even have things like wage theft to begin with. So just quickly about setting the container of what the workshop is going to look like. Folks mentioned it at the beginning, but this workshop is being recorded right now. So if you didn't know that, now you know. But that also means that you can stay anonymous in all of this. You can turn off your camera and turn off your microphone and change your name, as they said at the beginning, in case you missed it, to a different name, a pseudonym of your choosing, if you don't want if you don't want your employers to find out, or for whatever reason you don't want your identity tied to this workshop, no problem. Feel free to take a second to do that. If you have any trouble with any tech at all, Also, if you have any trouble with any tech at all, feel free to private message me or any of the other WSN staff, and we can try and troubleshoot for you. And then finally, if you need closed captioning, I believe Zoom has an automated closed captioning option. It should be in the bottom tab. So you can just click that and it'll turn on. And if you want to opt out of it, you can obviously also opt out of it too by clicking it and then turning it off. So yeah, that's it for setting the container. I will pass it now to Pam, who's going to tell us a little bit about the terms that we're going to use.
Thanks, Nikki. Hi, everyone. Yeah, so oftentimes related to employment and your rights at work, there's a lot of terms that we use that might be considered jargon, but also, a lot of folk might know a lot about their rights on this call, or maybe they're coming here to find out about them. I'm just going to do an overview of some of the terms that we're going to use and a brief definition of all of them. So the first one is wage theft. We've said it a lot of times already, but maybe some folk aren't familiar with that word. It's often also known as stolen wages or not being paid for your work. Wage theft is the failing to paying of wages or providing of employee benefits rightfully owed to an employee by contract of law. So that's why we're here today. We're trying to address wage theft and ensure that workers know that wage theft isn't okay and that there are ways to rectify that. Next one, Nikki. Thanks. Word that we used a lot today will be the ESA, and it's short form for the Employment Standards Act, which is the law in BC that sets the minimum standards of your rights at work. The next one is ESB, also a short form word, but it's the Employment Standards Branch, which administers the Employment Standards Act and regulations, which sets the standards of payment, compensation, and working conditions in BC. Another one is, maybe another term for wage theft, but it's a term that's used by the Employment Standards Branch a lot. It's an act that violates law. And it's the word that is described when each part of the law or each section of the law has been violated, and that's called a contravention. Overtime. This is one that some folk often do know about, but don't know about. So kind of with maybe if we wanted to get interactive here and use the reaction emoji on the bottom there with a high five or hands up if folk here know how to calculate your overtime. Oh, I see one thumbs up. See two. Great. 3. Thanks, everyone. So overtime, that's great. Super exciting that a lot of you know how to calculate your overtime. So essentially it's time and a half after 8 hours a day and time and a half after 40 hours a week, but employees are paid double time and a half for hours worked over 12 hours. Compensation for length of service, otherwise known as severance, which is a payment made to employees by employers for notice of period after they are told they are terminated without cause. What this could look like in terms of numeration, it's after 3 months of working, it's 1 week pay, and after 2 years, it's up to 2 weeks pay, and then you're adding a week for every year, up to 8 weeks total. Statutory pay or statutory holiday pay. We'll play the same game again with the reactions, emojis. Who here knows how statutory pay works in BC? Awesome. That's great. Well, statutory holiday pay are those are the holidays. So, New Year's Day or Christmas or Easter, those types of holidays. So if you've worked the last 15 out of 30 days leading up to the stat holiday, you are entitled to your daily wage pay, plus 1.5 of your regular hours wage up to 12 hours, and double wage pay after 12 hours if you worked on that day. So you get average days pay and time and a half if you've worked on that day. And when you start something to know, when you do start a new job, you're only entitled to stat pay only after being employed for 30 days. Vacation pay. This is one that we always look forward to, but one that we see is often violated is vacation pay. Who here knows what vacation pay is and how that works with a show of emoji or reactions? So essentially, vacation payouts work. It's 4% of all wages that's added to your paycheck or put to the side. It could be either added to your paycheck, every paycheck, if you've consented to that, or it's put to the side and you could collect it when you take time off. And one thing to note is if you've worked longer than 5 years, actually 6%, it goes up to 6% vacation pay. So now that we went through some of the definitions and the terms, there are some rights that are violated and some forms of wage theft that occurs more often. And the ones that we see, and this list is giant, but so we'll go top 5. And overtime pay is one of them, which we just discussed. Unpaid off the clock work, which is essentially, if you're stuck at work for an extra 15 minutes mopping the floors, but you're not getting paid for that time. Severance pay or compensation pay. So basically, being fired without just cause and your employer doesn't compensate you properly with payment or notice. Illegal deductions. This could look like, if you break something at work and your employer takes it off your paycheck, that's illegal. Another example is if, there's food being wasted if you work in a restaurant and that comes off your paycheck, that is also, or out of your gratuities, that is also illegal. And then receiving no pay at all. So basically, you don't get a paycheck at the end of your 40-hour work week or 10-hour work week, or you weren't paid compensation. Yeah. So those are the top 5 forms of wage theft. So now we'll go over the process to recover wages, and I'll dive into the direct action component, which is one of my favorite topics of this presentation. And then Andrea will follow through with the demand learn employment standards complaint. And this is the way there's different avenues to get justice, and it's whatever justice looks like for workers. That's the best avenue, and workers are the driver in the driver's seat. They are in the driver's seat of any of these avenues to access the justice. But sometimes a way that workers wants justice is to take direct action. So it's not that workers don't have power or voices, and it's that there are barriers for workers to harness their power and their voices, and it's not being heard by the people in power like their employers. So this direct action is building a community of worker power. And why this is so important to take direct action, if it's a possibility or availability to the worker. It's just time to redistribute power and mobilize across sector, across the province, and taking action together in campaign work like Nikki shared, and putting solidarity in action for demanding for safe and equitable working standards for everyone. And how does this all take place? By building community power is by effective worker-led campaigns through taking direct action in the workplace. So for example, when a worker is facing wage theft, if they want to file a complaint with the government, which Andrea will discuss with us in a little bit, it might take over a year to recall your wages. So, when the government doesn't uphold the current protections that exist for workers, community can come together and support these workers by getting those wages back. Why direct actions is also really important is that it brings the visibility to workers' experience by amplifying these voices. And it's empowering people and holding businesses accountable against wage theft, because wage theft is an endemic problem and it's happening everywhere. So some examples of direct actions and when community came together. We have in the middle there, the rebar resistance. This is a worker that wasn't paid any of their wages and their gratuities during the pandemic. And we know that time was really difficult for many folk. And this community came together. We walked up to the employer, the place of business. We gave them a demand letter, which Andrea's going to discuss this in a couple of seconds, and saying that we wanted this worker to get their wages right before Christmas. And we showed up again, and we had some media. We had a bit of a demonstration in front of Rebar, and then we received this worker's wages within 2 days, right before Christmas. And that's because the community came together and supported this worker. And also this worker stood up for their rights. And so that was a win. And then above that, we had a lifestyle market campaign. That's just these workers came together. They were upset that they weren't getting hazard pay and paid sick days like many other grocery stores. They organized, they mobilized, they ended up unionizing their employment. They got, hazard pay, higher wages. They got, a very beautiful collective agreement after unionizing. And there's some photos leading up to this one. Next slide here. Nikki, if you want, maybe the next one. And that's from, we did an action in the grocery store, and got a petition, and did phone banking and phone bombing and fax machine bombing. And it was very effective direct action. And these workers got what they deserved. And then the last but not least, this campaign's still going on now, and you can find it on our website, Justice for Brew Creek Workers. This worker, didn't get all of his, was dealing with wage theft. His employer was stealing his gratuities. In fact, he was never getting any of his gratuities. And this worker filed a complaint with the Employment Standards Branch, which we'll talk about that in a little bit. But due to the injustices of this process, this worker didn't get all their wages. So we're currently advocating through a petition to get these workers all their gratuities back. So that's me about direct action. And yeah, I hope that if you have any questions, we could dive into the direct action stuff at the end. I'll pass it over to Andrea.
Awesome, thank you, Pam. So I'm going to talk a little bit about demand letters and what they are and what they do. So originally, when we or other workers would put together demand letters, they were a required part of the complaint process with the Employment Standards Branch, where you basically had to take your issues to the employer first, show that you tried to resolve them and were unsuccessful, and before you could file a complaint. Of course, that wasn't great. Not a lot of people are in a position where they feel like, they can confront their boss on their own. That's no longer required. But originally, we would help workers write these letters as a form of informal resolution with their employers. Aside from that, and born out of that also came workers, showing up together and bringing a list of demands to their boss, especially in cases where issues were kind of across the workplace, in order to act together to get what they wanted and draw attention. Sometimes as a part of campaigns, sometimes as the first step of a campaign. And now still we use it, and you can use it too, as a form of basically trying to negotiate a settlement with an employer who owes you wages. If you filed a complaint, as we'll chat about in a little bit, the wait times are quite long. Not everybody can afford to wait that long. Sometimes it can be worth a try to negotiate a settlement with the employer. So what does it consist of? A demand letter, it just consists of the main issues and like a short, brief explanation of how they break the law, to show to the employer, that your rights. It could be quoting specific sections of the Employment Standards Act to say, it says exactly right here, you can't do this. What you're asking for, if your employer owes you multiple types of wages, to break them down by type of wages to show, that it's exactly how you got there, and a short explanation of, why you think the branch will make a decision in your favor and why they should settle. Of course, we know that they should just follow the law in the first place, and a deadline by which they have to respond before you take further action, such as filing a complaint. In some cases, we will just file a complaint knowing the wait time is very long as well. And if if a complaint resolves via the letter, it's easy to withdraw. And that's to make sure that everybody, everybody's complaints aren't even more delayed by all the wait times. Again, it does require for you to confront your employer if this is an avenue that you're looking to pursue. A lot of the times where we see workers do this, it's once they've already left the workplace to then go back and try to recover those wages. So that's a little bit about demand letters. And now for the complaint process, I'm curious to know if anybody here submitted a complaint with the Employment Standards Branch before, or have any familiarity with the process, kind of know what to expect. If you do, you can pop up those reactions as well. And if you don't, that's totally okay. That's why we're here. All right. So, Nikki, if you could give me the next slide. Awesome. So who can file a complaint with the Employment Standards Branch? If you are an employee and you are in BC, you're off to a great start. If you are not protected by a union, you are covered by the Employment Standards Act. And if you're not in a federally regulated profession, if you are, you would be covered by the labor code. So you would still have an avenue to resolve your issues. But most people, most people can file a complaint with the Employment Standards Act. It's intended to cover the majority of workers. The limitation period is just the term for the deadline that is given to file a complaint. So all complaints have to be filed within 6 months of either whenever the incident happened, if you're still working there, or from your last day of work or from the termination of the employment. Anything that's submitted after 6 months, they basically can't admit. The wage recovery period. The wage recovery period is once you've submitted a complaint on time, how far back can you recover wages? You can recover wages a year back from either the last day that you worked or the day the complaint was filed if you were still working there when you filed the complaint. And the complaint wait time. So as I mentioned before, it's a pretty lengthy process. A lot of the process is just waiting. So once you file the complaint, if you don't hear back, that's unfortunately pretty normal. Right now, it seems to be taking 6 to 12 months to hear back about your complaint. All right, so preparing a complaint. This is kind of on the right here, what part of the complaint form might look like. You fill out a form online, but before you get to doing that, you're just going to want to have a couple of things set aside that'll make this easier. If you calculate your owed wages or an estimation, you don't have to be 100% certain, but figure out what your employer owes you. If you have a list of other issues or contraventions, so for example, if your employer mischaracterized you or told you were a contractor when you were working for them, or if they didn't give you your vacation or they didn't give you breaks, that kind of stuff. If you're unsure whether or not your employer broke the law in a specific setting, it's okay to include it in the complaint anyways, and they will let you know if it doesn't apply to your situation. You can gather your evidence. You're going to have several opportunities to submit evidence in your complaint. So it can feel like a lot of pressure to have everything, in one go, especially if your limitation date is coming up. You don't have to do that, but whatever you have handy, if you set it aside and prepare to submit some of it ahead of time, that'll take away some of that burden, and you'll be given an opportunity to do that in the complaint. And then you're going to get to this online form, and it looks a little bit like this. This is a couple of pages in. The first couple of pages are just going to ask you information about yourself and your contact information. And then once it gets to asking you about, the issues that you're facing at work, it's very general. They don't ask you for a lot of very, very specific information at this point. All right, and awesome. So I mentioned a little bit of evidence that you can include in your complaint. So I'll talk a little bit about what you can include and also when you can include it. A lot of people, you're going to work every day. You're not worried about documenting every single thing that happens. It's not possible to document every single thing that happens, but that doesn't mean that your rights can't be informed or that your complaint can't be successful. So the evidence just has to be reasonable. It doesn't have to be absolute. You just have to, you know, show with what you can that the events took place. You can include statements. So your own statements about your own experiences can be considered evidence in your complaint. In order for that to be more likely to be successful, you're going to want to include as many details as possible. Who was involved, you know, names and roles, where you were, if you were at work, even, you know, specifically where you were, the time of day, any other people that were around, and dates or approximate dates. So, you know, you may not have exact information, and that's okay. If you just include as much as you can, in as much detail as you can, that'll be enough. And then also, you know, if it does have to be for something for which you were present. So a conversation that you were a part of, for example. And for other things, you can have witness statements for events that they were present for. For example, a meeting they were in that you weren't in, but maybe having that information can be helpful to your complaint. You know, maybe it's something your manager said, for example. And if they're willing, they're able to submit those, just type up a statement of what occurred using those same details. And the more detailed it is, the more likely it is that, you know, it will help your complaint be more successful. And other documents related to your employment. So this can be really broad, but just to give some ideas, if you have an employment agreement or contract, if you have different policies by your work, you know, maybe they have an illegal overtime policy or anything like that, as well as ROEs and T4s and that kind of stuff that can help with showing how much money you were paid. Maybe your employer says that they paid you more than they did. And it can also help to solidify your start date and your employment end date if those are in dispute at all. Communications with employers and coworkers that are related or helpful to your complaint. So this can include, you know, text messages, screenshots, emails, internal communications if they have, you know, anything else like that. It doesn't have to be fancy. It can just be, you know, typed up, screenshot, printed out, anything like that. You can even just take a photo. As long as it's legible and it's clear what it is, you can include that as well. And also for those things, you know, if you don't have access to them anymore, but you know the employer has access to them, it can be helpful to just write that they exist and that the employer has access to them, to hopefully prompt, you know, the investigator to ask them to submit those as well. And, you know, if that's not accessible either, you can go back to the first point where, as much as you can remember, you know, give a detailed account of what took place. And finally, schedules and wage statements, your schedules of hours worked. If your employer has provided you with schedules, but they don't actually reflect how much you worked, you can add your own corrections. If your employer didn't provide you with schedules, a best guess is totally fine. Maybe, you know, maybe you just had the same amount of hours each week, or you know approximately how much you worked each week, and you remember, you know, approximately when you were away. That's okay. Even if you fill out like a blank calendar and give it your best guess in each one, that'll be acceptable. And the employer, if they disagree, can always provide their own copy, basically. And wage statements, those are your pay stubs. Your employer is required to provide you with pay stubs, but of course we're dealing with employers who aren't following the requirements they're meant to follow, so you might not have them, but if you do, they're very, very helpful in having a complaint and adding your evidence to your complaint to see how much you were paid. Maybe, you know, if it doesn't show certain types of pay, that can be one very easy way to prove that you weren't paid. If your employer did not provide you with pay stubs, and that does happen, or they provided you with inadequate pay stubs, it'll be, you know, for any information that's missing from the pay stubs, it will be expected of the employer to provide evidence to dispute what you're saying they owe you. But you're still going to want to provide something if you can. So even, you know, a little screenshot from a bank statement or a check or anything that basically shows what they owed you. And if there's anything that you think would be beneficial to your complaint, but you can't, you know, you can't include it, sometimes it can be more helpful to explain why that's not the case. All right, and we'll move on to the next part here. This is quite a long section with complaints. So the first thing that'll happen is the investigator, once your complaint, has been picked up, the investigator will reach out. They're going to confirm details about your complaint. They're going to make sure the complaint's still active. Maybe it's been resolved in the meantime. Maybe some stuff has changed. They're going to ask you to submit your evidence. So that'll be another opportunity to submit your evidence if you have, maybe you haven't submitted anything in the complaint itself, or maybe there's additional stuff. They'll ask the employer afterwards. They'll let the employer know there's a complaint against them and ask them to respond. They'll also be asking the employer to settle. So they'll give the employer an opportunity to just pay you what you're asking. And if the employer doesn't do that, or they offer maybe less and you're not accepting that, the investigator is going to put together something called a findings package. So that is a report that they put together where they take the evidence that they thought was relevant from what you submitted and the evidence they thought was relevant from what the employer submitted. And then they're going to do a write-up of what they think the situation is. And that's going to be moved over to a decision maker who's going to issue a formal decision called a determination. That's going to tell the employer that they have to pay you certain things, they have to do certain things. So I mentioned a couple of words, investigator, adjudicator. I'm just going to quickly go over and kind of in more detail clarify the different roles. So the main person that you'd be speaking to if you have an employment standards complaint is going to be your investigator. So that's different from the adjudicator who makes the decisions. And their main role is going to be to gather evidence and to help to facilitate a settlement if you and the employer are willing to maybe agree to a settlement. And a settlement can include anything. It can be the contents of the complaint. It could be less, it could be more, although that'll be a difficult thing to get the employers to agree to. And they're going to help to facilitate that. So you don't have to speak directly to the employer during the process. You would just be speaking to the investigator. The employer would just be speaking to the investigator. They're going to ask, follow-up questions, maybe ask you if you have certain types of evidence that you haven't submitted, maybe you haven't thought of. Can be helpful in that sense. And if the settlement does not take place, then they will put together a findings report and provide it to both you and the employer. One other thing the investigator can do if you do request it is, maybe it hasn't been at a findings report yet. You don't know if you want to accept a settlement or you're just curious. You can ask the investigator as well to share with you what the employers shared in response, whether it's their evidence or anything like that. And the adjudicator comes in when basically the investigator's job is done and the settlement has not taken place. They'll have a look at the investigator's report and the evidence. They may ask you or the employer follow-up questions. They may not. And then they'll issue a formal decision. So both you and the employer will get a copy of the formal decision and all the information that they used to make that decision. So again, an overview of what I mentioned earlier. Basically what you can expect once you file the complaint is you're going to hear from the investigator, you're going to submit your evidence, you're going to see the employer's response, or at least they'll submit a response. A settlement might take place. It'll always be offered. You also don't have to, even if an employer offers, you never have to accept a settlement if you don't want to. Your report of findings that's going to be issued, and then the formal decision. So a couple of things. So the remedies are the kind of things that you can get from an employment standards complaint. You can recover mostly wages. There are certain parts of the Employment Standards Act that are not wages. So for example, I mentioned before, maybe your employer isn't giving you breaks or something like that. They can't pay you back for that. So you can include those in a complaint. Basically what the branch can do is try to get the employer to agree to change a policy or something like that. But mostly the bulk of the stuff they do is recover wages. So that includes, your regular wages if you worked and you weren't paid for any reason, overtime pay, vacation pay, stat holiday pay, termination pay. That one's really common. Anything else like that. And if it makes it to the point of a determination, so the employer refuses to pay the whole way through, they'll also be charged a $500 fine for each contravention. So that's each part of the act that they didn't follow. So that also includes any contraventions that didn't have wages linked to them, for example, like breaks. And they'll have to pay interest on those wages as well. And finally, I think now I'll talk a little bit about protections against retaliation. As we know, that's unfortunately quite common and can be a barrier to filing these complaints. So the Employment Standards Act prohibits employers from retaliating or mistreating a worker because of a complaint or because an investigation is taking place. So for example, if you're still working somewhere and you're also going through an investigation, it's illegal for your employer, to cut your hours, to, keep you from other opportunities you may be offered, to threaten to do any of those things, to fire you, anything like that. So if it does, or if for asserting your employment standards rights in the workplace, it applies there too, then either if you haven't filed a complaint already, you would file a complaint, or you would basically just inform the branch. And just like before, you would include any details or evidence that you have, including just your own statements. And that could even be enough. If you don't know what else to add, they will let you know. And one of the things that can be resolved as a result of that is the employer can potentially have to pay for anything that you lost as a result. So for example, if you were fired for asserting your rights in the workplace under the Employment Standards Act, the employer might be made to pay you all the money that you lost while you were looking for another job, or a reduction in wages. They might have to make up for that. The vulnerable worker open work permit, just wanted to add that in here. In some cases, employees face extra risk when they're filing a complaint. If your employer is tied to your status in Canada, one option is a temporary solution called the vulnerable worker open work permit that can be given if it's determined that the worker is facing abuse in their employment. And that can include, not being paid your wages is covered in that as well. As long as you have a valid employer-specific work permit or implied status, you can apply. It's just an online application. It's free. You can apply as many times. And it basically grants you an open work permit for a temporary period of 12 months, after which you can reapply if you're still experiencing hardships, and that's to make it so that you can switch employers. And sometimes, once you're out of there, it might be more accessible to also file an employment standards complaint from there. So that is all I have for you about employment standards complaints. I believe we are heading towards some breakout groups, and I'll pass it back to Nikki.
Yes, thanks, Andrea, for that. Why don't we, before we go into the breakout groups, let's take a second. I'll stop sharing my screen, and we can see if folks have any questions. So feel free to either raise your hand with the Zoom feature, or just go off mute. And if anything, if you have any questions up until this point, now's your chance. And I will set up breakout groups in the meanwhile.
I see Shane has a question. Good question, Shane. The Employment Standards Act doesn't make a difference between full-time and part-time workers, so you have the same rights. But one thing that it does enforce is, for example, if your employer has given you a full-time contract and they're not paying you full-time hours, then basically the Employment Standards Branch can make you pay you according to the contract. Outside of the Employment Standards Branch at common law, generally in BC, 30 hours and up is what's considered to be full-time. So even if the branch doesn't give a definition for it, if you have a full-time contract, they need to be paying you at least 30 hours. Does that answer? Feel free to pop in any like follow-up questions or let me know if that didn't answer your question anyway. Thanks.
Not sure if that's a new question, Shane, but if it is, please go ahead.
It's a new question. Can you hear me okay? So flight attendants are required to work, and they're only paid while they're in the air. So for example, they're required to start at a particular time to get the plane ready and serve the passengers, but they don't start getting paid until the flight takes off. So that could be like maybe half an hour or something like that. But if there's some type of delay and they're just sitting on the apron, it could be like maybe 6 hours of work where they don't get paid. Is that considered wage theft?
Yeah, so I'm sure that can add up to a lot of hours and a lot of money too. The Employment Standards Act considers people to be at work whenever they're at a location where their employer told them to be, unless it's at their own home. So if they're required to be in a specific place, maybe they're not even doing anything. Maybe they are, that's considered to be time worked. And so they have to pay for all of that time.
They are actually working because they have to serve the passengers and clean the plane and stuff like that, but they don't actually start getting paid until the flight takes off. And the flip side is that once the plane lands, they stop getting paid, even though they're still required to work until everyone gets off and stuff like that. So that would be considered wage theft.
Based on that information that you shared, it sounds like wage theft. I see Pamela asked a follow-up question to ask if they're unionized.
I believe Air Canada, well, I'm not sure. The employees of WestJet were not, and some of the employees were wanting to get unionized, but I don't know what happened with that. I don't know if that went through or not.
Yeah.
But generally, the WestJet was trying to prevent the workers from unionizing.
Yeah. So if they, yeah, it sounds an awful lot like wage theft for sure.
Okay.
Can I ask a question?
Absolutely.
I have an employer who expects me to be at their beck and call via my telephone, whether I respond to texts or phone calls. And I used to, but now I've stopped because I have had conversations with her, letting her know I'm not available 24 hours a day. I'm available on the days that I'm at work. That would be considered wage theft, right? Like, I'm not at work, but and we've had like numerous conversations, and she doesn't understand that she kind of is racist in her own sense that Canadians don't know how to work, and I should be available at her beck and call.
Yeah.
Since I've denied her, like, and I've replied and said, as per our conversation, I'm not available. You contact me on Tuesday when I'm at work. My last conversation with her is she wanted to reduce my pay. So I don't know whether that's my next pay period is Friday, so I'm quite interested to see what she's going to do. But I expressed that no, I'm doing the same workload. I'm just not available for you outside of time.
Yeah, that I hear more and more of stuff like that too, as people are working remote and it's easier, for employers to gain access to their workers. And I can't say exactly. Part of the reason is because you're clearly having to do work for this person. But that definition of being at work excluding, when you're at your own home, I have to say I'm not entirely sure, but I would love to get back to you at a later time if you would be okay with that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thank you.
And also, if any of the other WSN folks on this call have an answer to that.
Yeah, I think the problem nowadays is cell phones and our availability, and everyone thinking that your cell phone is with you constantly, which is true, but there's a line drawn.
Boss. Not
Yeah.
for the benefit of your employer. You're entitled, to your free time. If if that were to be considered time at work, what would come into play is your minimum daily pay. Like your employer has to pay you at least 2 hours for any day that you work, even if they don't make you work for 2 hours. So
Yeah.
if that were to be considered work time, then this person would have to pay you 2 hours every time they wanted to give you a call.
Great. Yeah, that's true. Thank you.
Yeah.
Are there any other questions? Maybe, great. Yes, Shane, go ahead.
Sorry, I guess it's just a kind of very similar question for truck drivers, employees who are only paid while traveling, but they're required to pick up deliveries and be there while the truck is loaded. And sometimes this could take like 2 to 4 hours where they're required to be there and assist, but they don't start getting paid until they actually depart. And then once they arrive at the destination, they stop getting paid, but they're required to unload. Would that also be considered wage theft?
Yeah, sometimes with travel time, there's, specific cases where time is not paid, but if they're required to be there to do work, or, if you're required to like pick something up or even other staff up on your way to a work site, and if you have to be there for any reason, they do have to pay you for that time. So it sounds like in that case, because they're asked to perform like certain work, it sounds like they should probably be getting paid based on that. It's so common. Hey, I feel like everybody's experienced some form or another at some point, unfortunately.
Yes, sorry, go ahead. Go ahead, JC.
I was just going to say, I feel like I'm a lot older than you guys. And I feel like I've always gone to work and I've started early, sometimes half an hour, sometimes 15 minutes. And that gets taken advantage of. So it's expected. And for instance, this certain employer now is expecting me and starts asking questions as soon as my time is over as well. And I feel like I think it's wonderful you guys are doing this because you're teaching the younger generation to know their worth. And because it's hard for me to push back now and not show up 20 minutes early, half an hour, and begin my day. But it's not right. And what my employer doing is not right. So I just wanted to thank you guys for showing up today.
Yes, thank you so much, JC, for being here, of course. Yeah, these things always start with workers standing up and fighting back. So it's like I said at the start, it's really exciting to be able to host this and meet some of you folks. I'm just gonna quickly look at the chat. Yes, Shane, to answer your question, the WSN website, which I will link in a second, has a Know Your Rights section that you can take a look at. Yeah, thanks, Ismail, for sending that. So if you click on that link, Shane, you'll be able to see a lot of different like areas of your rights under the act spelled out there. So hopefully that's helpful. I'm gonna put out maybe a final call for questions. We do have a couple more minutes, so if you have questions, please don't hesitate to ask them, or you can save them for the end and we can ask them there too. But consider this your one like government website. Do folks know if there's a government website that spells out your rights? I mean, yes, you can read the act itself. That's on the government website. Andrea, I'm not sure if you have.
Yeah, so there's the Employment Standards Act, which has, the specifics in there. Sometimes it doesn't feel very specific, but also the Employment Standards branch will have bits of information here and there if you're looking for a more official source. And then, yeah, we have a more broken down kind of plain language, casual version of that as well. The person has never received pay. I see a question from Sophia. Thanks, Sophia, for your question. Oh, I see what you mean. So like if you worked for an employer and they never paid you at all. Does I don't know, Pam or Nikki, if you know the answer to this. The compensation, I know that the ESB can't compensate for missing EI, but an ESB determination or can be helpful to prove that you in fact worked those hours. So there's a whole other side of consequences to the worker when their employer breaks the law.
I am actually not very sure about this question. I wonder if Pam has the answer, or the three of us can dig in and do some research and get back to you, Sophia. That's a great question.
Yeah, I wonder, like there is the other way around. So for example, like, if you have a determination, an employment standards branch determination, then you could use that evidence to apply for EI. But if you're trying to apply for EI before you receive that determination from the employment standards branch of whether the fact that you weren't paid any wages at all, like you may apply for EI and you may be denied, but there's a process called like reconsideration process where you could share like evidence that you've worked and you haven't been paid, and sometimes those are successful and sometimes those aren't, but that's an avenue as well.
Yeah, and that is through Service Canada, not the branch. I wanted to add as well, we have, the general rights information, but for folks who are wanting to know more specific details, information based on your specific situation as well, we have a request support form on our website too, that you can send in at any time. Sasha, your question is so common. So there isn't anything about salaried employees, as long as you're covered by the Employment Standards Act, that exempts them from overtime. It could mean that the employer maybe doesn't schedule you to work overtime, but they do, they have to pay it. If the employee requests it, you can bank that time basically to take that time off. But the time off has to be taken at the rate that the overtime would be paid. So time and a half or double time. So let's say if you work an hour of overtime, they can pay you a time and a half for your wages, or they can give you an hour and a half off. However, the time off has to be at the request of the employee. So unless you've asked for that, they have to pay you for those wages. So for example, if you've been working somewhere and the whole time you've been working there, they've just been giving you time off instead, you can submit an employment standards complaint to recover that overtime pay. Yeah, there are a couple of exemptions for overtime, but they're not extremely common. One of them, for example, is managers, and not, if manager is in your job title, that doesn't necessarily mean your employer doesn't have to pay you overtime, although a lot of them will try to use that job title to justify that, but it's the branch's own definition of a manager. So that's where your main part of your role is hiring and firing and managing employees, and that's to where you have a degree of independence and you can do that yourself, not just to provide input. So if your employer is not paying you overtime because they say that you're a manager, and it sounds like maybe either you're not sure if your position meets the requirements for the branch's requirements for a manager being exempt from overtime, it's possible to file a complaint to find out, or also you're welcome to reach out.
Okay, maybe with that, I will start the breakout groups at 2:05. We can take approximately 10 to 15 minutes. I'll check in at the 10-minute mark. We'll see how it's going, and then we can take an extra 5 minutes if we need. But we will be back by 2:20. That's when I'll close the breakout groups. So give me a sec while I set that up, and we can go from there. Welcome back. Welcome back, folks. I hope the breakout groups went well. I guess, I don't know. Yeah, maybe I'll leave 2 minutes to see if any questions came up or any observations, if anybody would like to share how that experience was, and then we can start wrapping up. Take it away if you have any. You can raise your hand or just go off mute. And if there's nothing, that's totally okay. I'll be respectful of your time. You can also send it in the chat. Yeah, so thanks folks for coming today. You can join the WSN by becoming a member. Membership is completely free. You get access to educational opportunities like this, as well as exciting opportunities to organize, to campaign, and to stand up and fight back for worker justice. You can also follow us on social media. We have a Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. I think we also have a TikTok that June has helped us make. But most importantly, I guess I'll direct your attention to our request support page. If you think or if you have any like issues or questions about your place or your work, you can reach out to us on that website. I wonder if one of my colleagues could also send the link in the chat so folks can click it there. That way, if you fill out that form, we will get back in touch with you and support you and answer any specific questions that you may have about your work. And then finally, I believe June will send a review or a feedback form rather for this workshop. It always means a lot to all of us if you fill it out, because it helps us improve the workshop. The better the work, the stronger that this workshop is, hopefully the more workers are able to know about the rights, the better they're able to know about they're entitled to and whatnot. So we always appreciate you filling out that form. And yeah, that's it. Thanks everyone. If anybody has any final comments or questions, go ahead, but that's about it.
Thank you. Are there any final questions? Okay. Just share our contact details one last time. So again, too, if you're interested in reaching out to WorkBC, these are our contact details, and we will send all the contact details that were sent in the chat today in an email afterwards, just in case you don't catch them now. So thank you so much for everybody coming out and participating, and thank you Worker Solidarity Network as well for your participation and the really valuable information. I learned a lot there that I'd never heard of before, so that's definitely valuable in my work as well. So that's it. Hope everybody has a great rest of their day. Bye.